My name is Adrian Hayes, and I am 26 years old. 6 weeks ago, my sister sat across from a psychiatrist she had hired herself, and told him I was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. I sat in the waiting room outside, hands folded, and I already knew what she was going to say before she said it. She told him I was unstable, erratic, not capable of handling money. I smiled at her when she came out. I nodded. Then I handed the receptionist a folder I had been carrying for 3 months, one she had never seen, one she didn't know existed. The next morning, her lawyer called her, not to congratulate her, to tell her the independent evaluation she'd paid for had come back, and it wasn't what she expected, not even close. My sister went pale. Her husband, who had already spent money on a vacation home he assumed was coming, called her twice before noon. She didn't pick up either time. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to 8 years ago, to a wooden porch, and a man named my grandfather said something I didn't understand, until the day that doctor's report landed on a lawyer's desk. The porch smelled like cedar and coffee. That's the first thing I remember about my grandfather's house. The smell of the wood he'd built the railing from himself, and the bitter, burnt smell of the coffee he refused to let anyone else make. His name was Frank Hayes, and he was the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I wasn't a problem to be managed. I was 18. My sister, Melissa, was 22, and already talking about the future of the family business, like she owned it. My parents had died when I was 12, a car accident on a wet road in November, and Grandpa Frank had raised us both from then on, in a house that smelled like cedar and old books, and, in autumn, wood smoke drifting in from the chimney. I remember the sound of the porch swing, a specific creak, second beam from the left, that never got fixed because Grandpa said a house, without a few honest sounds, was a house pretending to be something it wasn't. I remember the texture of his hands, rough, calloused, from 40 years of carpentry. When he shook my hand, he always shook my hand, even as a kid, like I was already a man he respected. It felt like sandpaper and safety at the same time. Melissa didn't get handshakes. Melissa got calculations. Even as a teenager, she talked to Grandpa about square footage and property lines and what the land might be worth someday. I never once heard her ask him how he was feeling. There's one memory I return to more than any other. I was 16. We were sitting on that porch in late September, the light gold and low the way it gets, right before the cold comes in, and he was fixing a chair leg with a hand plane, curls of wood falling onto his jeans. He didn't look up from the wood. He just said, "Adrian, the people who love you quietly are worth 10 of the people who love you loudly. Loud love wants an audience. Quiet love just wants you to be okay." I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was talking about romance, maybe, or friendship. I nodded like a 16-year-old nods at something he hasn't earned the meaning of yet, and I went back to watching the wood curl off the blade. We had dinner together most Sundays, pot roast, always pot roast, because it was the one thing Grandpa knew how to cook without a recipe. Melissa usually found a reason to be somewhere else by then. "Off with people who mattered more," she said once, not realizing I heard her. I started noticing small things around that time. The way Melissa would ask Grandpa Frank about his will at family gatherings, phrased casually, like she was just curious. The way she'd bring her husband, Brian, around more often once Brian started working in finance. The way her voice changed, got warmer, more performative, whenever Grandpa mentioned money. I didn't have a name for what I was seeing. I just felt it, the way you feel a draft in a house before you find the open window. There was one object in that house that meant more to me than anything else. A small wooden box, no bigger than a shoebox, that Grandpa kept on his workbench. He'd made it himself as an apprentice, 60 years before I was born. Dovetail joints cut by a 19-year-old's unsteady hands, the wood darkened with age and oil. "First real thing I ever built that mattered," he told me once, running his thumb along one uneven joint. "Ugly little box, but it's mine, start to finish. Nobody helped. Nobody can take credit for it but me." He looked at me for a long moment when he said that, and I didn't understand the weight in his eyes until years later. By the time I was 18, I loved that porch, that cedar smell, that broken fixed chair, more than I loved almost anything else in my life. And some part of me, quiet, unformed, not yet ready to be a real thought, understood that not everyone in my family loved it, or him, the same way. Grandpa Frank got sick the spring I turned 22. It started as forgetfulness, then a diagnosis, then a slow 2-year decline that ended on a Tuesday in March with a hospice nurse holding my hand in a hallway. Melissa cried at the funeral. I watched her cry, and I believed it, mostly. Grief is rarely simple. But I also watched her leave the reception early, not devastated, not needing air, but calm, already on her phone in the parking lot, already talking in a voice I recognized. 3 weeks after the funeral, I came back to the house to get a box of Grandpa's tools I wanted to keep. The front door was unlocked. I heard voices in the kitchen before I saw them, Melissa and Brian, standing by the counter where Grandpa used to burn coffee every morning. I wasn't meant to hear this. The estate's worth more than we thought, Brian was saying. But if Adrian's named co-executor, that slows everything down. We need him out of the picture, or at least out of the decision-making. He's not going to just step aside, Melissa said. He doesn't have to step aside, Brian said. He just has to be declared incapable of handling it. There are ways to do that. Doctors who will write what you pay them to write. I stood in the hallway with a box of my grandfather's chisels in my arms, and I said nothing. I didn't gasp. I didn't walk in. I filed it away. The way you file away a fact you know you'll need later, even if you don't know exactly how yet. That's the word they use for everything that used to be love. Assets. Estate. Position. I stood there and realized my grandfather had been dead for 3 weeks, and his own granddaughter was already talking about him like a line item. I left quietly. I took the tools. I said nothing to either of them. In the weeks that followed, I did small things. I kept paying the property taxes on the house out of my own account, quietly, without telling anyone, because I didn't want the house to fall behind while the family fought over its future. I mowed the lawn on Sundays. I fixed the porch swing, not the creak. I left that, but the hinge that had finally given out. I sat on that porch alone most Sundays after the mowing was done, drinking coffee I'd deliberately let burn a little, the way he used to make it. And I thought about the conversation I'd overheard, turning it over and over, looking at it from every angle I could manage. Nobody knew I was doing any of this. That was, in a way, exactly the point. I realized something during those weeks that changed how I moved through the rest of this story. I realized I was invisible to them. Melissa and Brian talked business in front of me like I wasn't in the room, because to them, I never had been. I was the quiet one. The one who didn't ask about money, the one they assumed didn't understand what was happening. I decided, somewhere in that invisibility, that I wasn't going to correct them. If they thought I didn't understand, I would let them keep thinking that. Invisibility, I realized, was not weakness. It was the only kind of power I currently had, and I intended to use it. The letter was inside one of Grandpa's chisel cases, tucked beneath a felt lining I almost didn't check. My name was on the envelope in his handwriting, the same handwriting from birthday cards and workshop labels. Adrian, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I need you to call the number below before you do anything else with the estate. Ask for Diane Corbett. She already knows everything. Grandpa, I didn't call that day. I sat with the letter for almost a week, turning it over, half afraid of what it would mean if I opened a door I couldn't close. But eventually I called. Diane Corbett turned out to be an estate attorney who had worked with my grandfather for 6 years, long before his diagnosis, long before Melissa started asking casual questions about wills at dinner. She'd met with him quarterly. She knew things about his intentions that no one else in the family did. Your grandfather was sharper than people gave him credit for. Even near the end, she told me in her office, sliding a folder across the desk. He suspected your sister and her husband would try something like this. He wanted to be ready. He wanted you to be ready. The folder held it all. A trust, established 2 years before his death, with specific provisions naming me as primary beneficiary of the house and workshop. Not because he loved Melissa less, Diane said, but because he didn't trust what she and Brian would do with it. There was also a clause, drafted with unusual precision, anticipating exactly the move I'd overheard in the kitchen. Any attempt to have a beneficiary declared incapacitated in order to seize control of the estate would trigger an independent evaluation by a court-appointed psychiatrist of the estate's choosing. One Grandpa had already selected years in advance. Dr. Nadia Rourke, someone with no connection to my family, someone whose report would carry more legal weight than any evaluation Melissa could privately arrange. He'd built the trap before they ever thought to set it. 2 weeks later, I overheard the rest, this time not by accident. Brian had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter during a visit, a spreadsheet on the screen, with numbers, dates, and a name. Dr. Colin Marsh, a psychiatrist Melissa had already scheduled an appointment with, for the following Thursday, the evaluation date, the one she believed would be the only one that mattered. I texted Diane 2 words, "He's moving." She texted back within the hour, "We're ready." That night, I lay in bed and thought about Melissa and Brian somewhere across town, probably congratulating themselves, probably already imagining what they'd do with a house that was never legally in danger of being theirs. They went to sleep thinking they'd won a fight I'd already finished 8 months ago, in an office with Diane Corbett, signing paperwork my grandfather had set up, before either of them knew there was a fight to have. Diane laid it out for me in plain terms, the kind she said she wished more lawyers used. "Your sister's private evaluation means nothing on its own," she said. "The trust requires the estate's designated evaluator, Dr. Rourke, to conduct an independent assessment before any competency claim can affect distribution. Melissa's doctor can write whatever she pays him to write. It has no legal standing here. Dr. Rourke's report is the only one that counts, and Dr. Rourke doesn't know your sister, doesn't know Brian, and doesn't take instructions from either of them. There's something else you should know," she added. This isn't a loophole built to protect you no matter what. If there had been any real concern about your capacity, Dr. Rourke's evaluation would have caught that too. Your grandfather didn't rig this in your favor. He rigged it toward the truth. He just trusted the truth would land on your side. I thought about that for a long time afterward. All I had to do was show up for one appointment, answer honestly, and wait. Melissa tried one more thing before the appointment. She invited me to lunch. Her treat, she said, which she never said. She talked about keeping the family together, and how Grandpa would have wanted us to handle this ourselves, without lawyers getting involved. She mentioned, almost gently, that if I just signed a simple form, giving her temporary oversight of the estate accounts, it would make everything easier for everyone. I looked at her over a plate I didn't finish. I'll think about it, I said. Her face relaxed, just slightly. She thought she'd landed something. My younger cousin Lucas, 17 and sharper than any of us, gave him credit for, caught me in the driveway afterward. Something's wrong, he said. You're doing the quiet thing. You only go quiet when something's actually happening. I told him not to worry. I don't think he believed me. I don't think he was supposed to. That night I drove out to Grandpa's house alone. I sat on the porch, in his spot, and the swing made the same creak it always had. Second beam from the left. The house was empty and dark, except for the porch light I'd left burning out of habit. I wish this were different. I wish Melissa had been the kind of sister who would have grieved with me, instead of calculated around me. I wish she had needed me, the way I once needed her, back when we were kids, and she still let me follow her around the yard. But wishes don't hold up. This house does. I cried on that porch, not because I was breaking, but because for the first time since the funeral, I let myself feel the whole shape of what I'd lost. Not just Grandpa, but the sister I'd hoped Melissa might still become. It wasn't weakness, it was clarity, arriving finally, the way cold water arrives all at once. My cousin Lucas called that same night, just to check on me, the way he'd started doing more often since the funeral. I didn't tell him everything. I never had to. He just said, "You sound tired." I told him I was. He said, "Get some sleep. Whatever it is, it'll still be there tomorrow." He was right about that, more than he knew. It was 11:50 p.m., the night before Melissa's appointment with Dr. Rourke, when Diane called. "Everything's filed," she said. "The trust's provisions are active. Dr. Rourke has her instructions, and no context from your sister at all. Clean slate, exactly as your grandfather wanted. Tomorrow, when Melissa walks in, expecting her own doctor's report to matter, it won't. Dr. Rourke's evaluation is the only one the court will recognize." I sat at the kitchen table in my apartment, laptop open, the rest of the building silent around me. I signed the final acknowledgement form Diane sent over, confirming I understood and accepted the evaluation process. A formality, but one that made everything, finally, official. "You did the hard part months ago," Diane said, warm but even, the way she always was. "Tomorrow's just paperwork, catching up to what your grandfather already decided." The clock on my laptop read 12:03 a.m. I am 26. I am the sole trustee of a house that smells like cedar, and I am, as of that moment, the only person in my family who actually knows how this story ends. And across town, in a house with a vacation home brochure still sitting on the kitchen counter, my sister was almost certainly asleep, dreaming about a version of tomorrow that had stopped being true 8 months ago. She'll find that out in about 11 hours. The appointment was at 10. I wasn't in the room, but Diane was, standing in for the trust, exactly as the provisions required. Melissa found me in the parking lot afterward. She looked composed, still confident, the way she always looked right before something collapsed. "Dr. Marsh's report is very thorough," she said. "I don't think you understand how this is going to go." I gave her a calm, level look. "I'll think about it," I said again, the same 3 words, and I watched something behind her eyes flicker. She hadn't expected me to say it twice, hadn't expected it to mean the same thing both times. Nothing. Her phone rang 40 minutes later, while we were both still standing near our cars. I watched her answer, watched her face change as Diane's voice came through, explaining that Dr. Rourke's independent evaluation, the one required by the trust, the only one legally recognized, found no evidence of incapacity, and that as a result, the estate's provisions naming me as trustee were now fully in effect, unchallenged and unchallengeable, by any private evaluation Melissa had commissioned. She lowered the phone slowly. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Brian pulled up a minute later, having driven separately, expecting good news, and I watched the same stillness settle over his face, once Melissa relayed what had happened. Not anger yet, just the blank look of a man realizing a spreadsheet he'd trusted completely had been wrong from the first cell. She looked at me like I was still the person she thought I was. I wasn't. I hadn't been for 8 months. "You knew," she said finally. "Not a question." "I'll think about it," I said, one more time, and this time, she understood exactly what I meant by it. Grandpa Frank used to say, "The people who love you quietly are worth 10 of the people who love you loudly." For years, I thought he meant something simple, that shy people love harder than confident ones, maybe, or that actions matter more than words. He meant something else. He meant that quiet love plans ahead. It doesn't announce itself. It builds a trust 2 years before it's needed and tells no one except the one person it's protecting. Loud love, the kind that talks about square footage at dinner tables, wants something from you. Quiet love just wants you safe, even after it's gone. Melissa and Brian never got the vacation home. The estate's provisions held exactly as Grandpa designed them, and the last I heard, Melissa had stopped returning Diane's calls. Embarrassed, I think, more than angry. Brian moved to another firm a few months later. Lucas, my cousin, still calls me sometimes, just to check in, no agenda at all, the kind of quiet love I understand now. As for me, I still have the house. I still fix the porch swing when it needs fixing, and I still leave that one hinge, second beam from the left, exactly as loud as it's always been. I think about Grandpa every time I sit in his spot with a cup of coffee. I've deliberately let burn a little, the way he always did. And I think, some inheritances aren't measured in money. Some of them are measured in how well someone loved you before you even knew you'd need it. If you've ever had someone protect you quietly, without ever telling you they were doing it, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Grandpa's coffee is still too strong, if I'm honest. I've never gotten it quite right. Maybe that's the point. Some things you're not supposed to perfect. Only keep trying at. The way he kept trying at everything. Right up until the day he couldn't anymore. And if this story moved you, subscribe. There are more to come.